The system usually pops over. Boom, boom, boom. There we go. Make sure it's working. Facebook says it's on. Yeah, there we go. It is there. Boom. There we go. Excellent. All right. Good. Yeah, it's working.
Is it hot take time?
Oh, wow. All right, Ryan. Are you ready for some fun?
Let's get in trouble.
All right, but before I'm going to cut the beginning off before the podcast, so that way I can make noise to know where to cut it. And so while people are hopping on, I'm going to give everyone a heads up. We're going to be talking about 5 different graphs about religion.
Yeah.
At a time where people in the United States are what I would call rational, level-headed, and developed a real good equilibrium for engaging things, because like all election season, it helps us reflect on what matters most and engage your neighbors across difference for the well-being of the whole. So I figure this is exactly what we need to do. There's Matthew who's in the chat. So if you are on live, and feel free, we can see all the different comments and stuff. And if you either give Ryan a hard time or say nice things, it might show up on the screen. But
wait, what's TVC, by the way?
Theology Beer Camp, Ryan.
Oh, the thing you just did, the Hootenanny.
Yeah, well, look, if you do a good job, with a few of these live things, next time we do it, I'll be like, you wanna come?
But I'm not a theologian, dude. That's the
problem. It doesn't
problem.
matter. Because Tony and you have your big project you're working on.
Ooh, that's right.
And it would be high quality research to see what happens when 250 people that haven't been to church in a really long time show back up to day drink and hang out with academics.
And we could try some questions out on the crowd.
Oh, yeah.
That'd be fun.
You know what helps people in a morning after a hangover? Graphs. That's what they're looking for. They're like, whoa, could you show me some graphs, y'all?
Yeah.
Hi, Kyle from Texas, North Texas. Yeah, Texas is big. When I moved from Los Angeles to back home to North Carolina, we drove our cars across the whole country, and there are a few states where you go, wow, they go on forever, and you go hours without seeing like a house. There's just like the random gas station, and you're like, what do they pay per hour? Because I bet you have to drive an hour to get to the gas station.
They got to pay you to drive there and drive back.
Yeah. There's
like 202 counties in Texas, by the way. There's the most counties of any state in the nation. Texas, 200 and some. It's crazy.
If they knew there were statistics that they could have more than everyone else, they would do it. That's my experience with my Texan family members. Is they want to be the best numerically at everything to compare, and then all the stats that California beats them at, they think are signals of a bad state.
You know what they're bad at? Providing power to people during cold snaps.
Yeah, that happens. Look, every state has their growing edge. All right, Ryan?
Yeah. And... Oh, yeah. What would Illinois be? This governor hasn't gone to jail yet. That's all right.
Yeah, really underperforming.
I know. It's Pritzker. I think he's too rich to try to get bought off, which is a good and a terrible thing all at the same time. So, and the last guy was like a billionaire too, and he didn't go to prison. So we're back to back champions now.
Ooh. Well, maybe it'll get trendy. Who knows what'll happen next? Illinois is really y'all taking off. It's probably your influence. That's what it is, Ryan. They're like, whoa. This, now that we got a man with graphs, rocking it out.
Yeah.
It's gonna be great. We got Steven from Copenhagen. So look, he's sitting in Copenhagen. He's going to look at some of these graphs about the state of religion in America and say, I'm glad I'm in Copenhagen. That's what I'm guessing. We'll find out what Steven thinks. But
you know what I always hate when I do a talk and someone goes, yeah, is the same thing true like in pick another country that's not America? I'm like, I have no idea. Like,
look, have you been around America? It's crazy enough. Can you figure that thing out?
Exactly. And nothing we do in America religion-wise transfers really anywhere else in the world. So it's like I got no generalizable statements for you. I apologize.
Well,
Oh, Steven's from Copenhagen, but he was from Illinois.
High school in Illinois. Look, he's one of your peeps. He's one of your peeps.
Hey, I want to know all your liberal people watching this right now. I card checked into my union yesterday at EIU. So now I'm official card carrying union member.
I don't know. I feel like you're setting up for saying something offensive in a minute.
No, I'm saying I joined because our administration's giving us a crappy offer in our contract. I want to strike.
Yeah.
So I card checked in so I could strike. That's really
Did you already book flights for this strike? Because that's what I hear those overpaid, underworked professors do is they just get a union and go on strike like they work at some fancy Starbucks and just head off and go on your vacations with all that illustrious money you pull down from all these big books, Ryan. Those big books.
You know what their proposed raise is this year for us? 1.25%.
On top of inflation. I understand.
Yeah. So I say if they keep that number there, I'm gonna go on strike and hold a sign that says inflation's 8.5. You give us 1.25. That's all you need to know.
Yeah. Well, don't worry. If it goes real bad, I can show you how to do a podcast.
I hear you put together a bunch of beer and a bunch of theologians in a field somewhere and have a great time.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, one fun thing about a theology beer camp is that I didn't realize I do a bad job sometimes communicating to people that hadn't been before what happens. Mm-hmm. So they showed up and they're like, I didn't realize the ticket actually paid for all the beer we could drink in 3 days. And I was like, yeah, I don't actually make money on beer camp. I sell tickets, fly my favorite podcasters and theologians to come day drink and be nerdy for 3 days, and I'll hang out. And then
how much beer was consumed, Tripp? Do you know?
Yes. So like how specific are you wanting, like the kegs? So we had 9
I want to know
full kegs.
9 how many people were there? 250 people?
Yeah, 9 full kegs.
Okay.
Which is about 240 pints, and then 6 corny kegs, which is 48 pints.
So over a pint per person.
Oh, we averaged about 9 pints per person, include if you average the individuals that didn't drink. And then some of us, Ryan, to honor the breweries that brewed this beer, stepped up for our individuals that didn't. And these are the provided. We had a pretty wild bottle share where everyone that came brings their favorite local beers and then you try them. Oh. And our mutual friend Tony Jones and his buddy brought moonshine. And opening night, we do like a live podcast. Me and then Dan Koch, who I know you've been on. You have permission before.
I do. Yep.
We're having fun doing this live podcast. It's going into karaoke, and because I'm 40 now, I planned out my consumption. Right, like I'm rotating beer to Diet Dr. Pepper,
nice.
so I was mature, and my wife threatened me.
You're grown up, Tripp. You're grown up.
I know. I was like, I gotta wait till day 3. But so then we're doing karaoke. Karaoke kicks off. I lost a bet at playing a Evangelical CCM music fantasy draft game.
Oh, and I love that.
Trey Pearson from it was in a CCM band Everyday Sunday. He was one of the people that won, and the other 3 had to perform DC Talk's Jesus Freak during karaoke. And so I was centered before karaoke, like just at where you could commit full.
Yeah.
I get done, and Tony got there late. I walk back, and he's like, "Oh, you look thirsty." And it looks like a glass with water in it. It was moonshine. The second half of karaoke, Tripp was in a different place. And
you might have missed a few more lyrics the second half than the first half.
Yeah, the next day I'm like looking at social media and going like, wow, I was real committed to Bohemian Rhapsody. And I was doing good. I was rotating out. I was staying hydrated. And then I'm like, oh yeah, I am thirsty. That was not water. That was fire juice.
You're walking right on the edge, Tripp. And Tony Jones just took his boot and put it in your butt.
Yeah, he was trying to ruin my witness.
It's all over, dude. You're deconstructed all the way.
Yeah. All right. So for those of you that don't know, Ryan, what's your 30-second blurb about why you do graphs and things? So assert your intellectual authority in a humble brag way.
I have a PhD in political science From Seminary University, I've published about 30 peer-reviewed articles in various, journals about religion and/or politics. I'm the author of 2 books currently: The Nuns, which came out in 2021, and then 20 Myths About Religion and Politics in America, which came out in March of this year. Nuns version 2 comes out next May, and I have a book called The Great Dechurching that's coming out with Jim Davis and Michael Graham next summer as well.
There you go. And you should all follow his Twitter because he does all these graphs. And one of the things I found that people that are rather certain about the finality of their own opinion is that sometimes data is problematic. So here's our goal, I think, is to kind of irritate everyone. You all be glad to know that listened last time and emailed me. He has no graphs on natalism. There's nothing about birth rates in this because I had multiple emails upset, and then others that were like,
"Me too."
Y'all, they're like, I thought I was so angry at you two, but you were having so much fun, and I couldn't tell if y'all were being sarcastic some of the time. And I was like, well, we started hanging out. Sometimes when nerds hang out and one gets a high quality joke they know kind of pushes one group, then you kind of try to outdo each other. So, and then I just realized you had tenure and I run a donation-based thing online, so I was not going to try to outdo you. That was my,
I don't have tenure, by the way. I will have it at the end of this year. So
I thought you were about to get it last time. That's why.
No, well, I go up in January, then I'll have it for sure by May.
All right.
So the end of this, I'm not worried about
unless your
tenure,
new union membership.
Oh yeah, they're gonna kick me out because of the union.
Yeah, they're like, whoa, only 0.5% for you.
I'll sue the crap out of them. National Labor Relations Board. Let's go.
All right, so I have made little slides with the 5 different graphs.
What's the x-axis here, Tripp?
Look, I was amused when Canva, when I was trying to make something that fit on the YouTube, had a graph one, and then you could pick, insert stuff. I just left the numbers, but then I thought faith, hope, love, justice, democracy. I figured it's like, election season data.
You didn't put natalism
it's optimistic.
On there. Well, I did not. No hot takes.
I did not put that on there because we've already covered it. So you're going to have to. Yeah. Okay. But so the first one here is religious attendance among African Americans, looking at it from 2008 to 2021. And if you look by age, here, the growth in those that attend never or seldom, you could see the kind of breakdown in the growth. And just as someone who has hung out in theological education spaces and lots of church conferences that you spoke at, there is an ongoing conversation about the difference between, growth and decline rates among kind of dominant white churches. And they'll have arguments about mainline and evangelical white spaces, and then how it shows up in different, different predominantly ethnic congregations, be it like the Black church or like Hispanic immigration and the Catholic Church and this kind of stuff. So I'm fascinated as to why this graph and what was the kind of question that made you start to run the numbers on it.
So there's actually a really kind of interesting backstory. I did a talk at an American Baptist. Well, I was on a panel for an American Baptist thing in Kansas City a couple of weeks ago, and the crowd was a lot more diverse, let's say, than my American Baptist church is in terms of race, because we're all a bunch of rural white people. I mean, the congregation was probably half Black, and I only had 5 or 7 minutes to give a talk, and I didn't even talk about Black Protestants because I didn't have time, and they almost ran me off the stage saying, "I want to hear more about my people." And I was like, I wish I would have known this was what the crowd looked like, so I could give you more of what you were looking for. And then that happened. And then I was at a talk last week with a bunch of Army chaplains, and they, one of them emailed me afterwards and said, could you give us some more information about African Americans and their church attendance, religious attendance over the last couple of years, by age especially? So a lot of things I tweet out are actually requests that people make. Like, can you show me this? And I'll go, yeah, sure. But I'm also going to put it on my Twitter. So not only do you benefit, like we benefit, like the larger community benefits. And so those two things together are like, I need to be more cognizant of my own bias, which is I'm biased towards white Christianity because I understand white Christianity a lot better than I understand anything else. And so that's when I start like tweeting about like Jewish people and Muslims and Hindus, I get in trouble because I don't understand it with the nuance that I understand white Christianity with. I'll give you an example. One time I tweeted a graph that said Reformed Jew, like reform with an ED, and they absolutely roasted me online. Like, you can't be a Reformed Jew. It's reform, not reformed Jew. I didn't know that until they told me that. And so I'm like, that makes me less likely to try to do anything outside my scope.
Yeah, it's
So
like when people that have never actually read the New Testament say revelations with an S, and you're like, that's not in the Bible. And they're like, yeah, it's the last one. And you're like,
it's
no,
in, yeah.
it's not plural.
Yeah, but that's the problem is like I know what I know, and I'll never understand Hinduism as well as I understand white Protestant Christianity in America. Never. I mean, I can read all the books in the world, but I've lived in this world for my entire life. And so I understand nuance and backstory and history and all that stuff that goes with it. So I really am trying to be, and actually in 20 Myths, I have a chapter called The Myth is that we're biased towards Christians. We're not biased towards Christians, we're biased towards big numbers. There's a whole lot of white Christians still in America. I know a lot of progressives say, why don't you raise up other voices? There's still a whole lot of white Christians in America. Like, we need to like recognize that fact, right? Like, for every one Mormon, there's 34 Protestants in America. So we need to at least talk about the majority still. And 1/3 of all Trump voters were white evangelicals. So anyway, Black Protestants, African-American religion is a lot different than white religion, right? Because it's like they have some mainline piece and some evangelical piece kind of mixed together, because theologically they're actually pretty conservative, on things like literalism, views of same-sex marriage. They're a bit more moderate on abortion than white evangelicals are, but on transgender, they look almost exactly like white evangelicals do. But the other thing is the Black church still plays, I think, an outsized role in the Black community compared to the white church in the white community. So I think what I'm really like looking at here is it the young people leaving the Black church, or is it all African Americans leaving the Black church? And the data says, what I was really shocked by was look at like 18 to 35. Now, 46% of 18 to 35-year-olds never or seldom attend, which means they go less than once a year. But amongst 65 and up, it's 40%. So really, there's not even really a substantive difference between the oldest Black people and the youngest Black people in America, when you're not seeing this huge age gradient, which we typically see, which is older people are a lot more religiously devout and young people are a lot less religiously devout. But amongst the Black community, even that 55 to 64, they're actually more likely to never or seldom attend than the youngest adults in the Black community. So the Black community is leaving religion at an incredibly rapid rate. Now, 36% of them say they're nuns, which is the exact same rate as white Protestants. So, I mean, it's a big deal to me that like that part of the Black community is kind of crumbling. And from a sociological perspective, we know the Black church really became a center for like social activity, economic activity, political activity, religious activity. And when you take that out, they've got to find something to replace that with. And that's a tall order, because for 100 years, white people had the Elks and the Moose and the American Legion and the Bowling League and all those things. The Black community was always never allowed to do those things, and the church was the place they could go to. And now they're not going to church. So the thing that's happening in all America is definitely happening to the Black community as well.
Is there a in the kind of literature on demographics and stuff, is there a difference in the, I don't know, the features that are postulated to generate secularization, right? Like, if you think of a lot of the sociology of religion in the initial secularization thesis, the primary reference point were the kinds of questions people that hang out in elite institutions ask because of intellectual reasons. Now, I'm not really sure that was the best explanation given, but because you see this delay in a sense of some of the trajectories of data, that has that kind of created a space to rethink what leads to the shifting participation or the shifting understanding of religious identity in traditional institutions.
I'm gonna make a graph today about that, Tripp. I'm gonna look at education, nuns by
I'm glad
education
you were
and
reading
race.
my mind.
Thank you, buddy. That's a great idea, because actually I want to see if Black people disaffiliate as education goes up. Do they disaffiliate rates that look like white people or are completely different? Look, this is what's great about my job. I don't know what the answer is, but I'm going to tell you it's interesting no matter what the data says. So I think you're right, and I think, but the bigger point for me is this though. We know that African Americans struggle economically. Like from an SES perspective, they're almost always at the bottom of the income spectrum, the bottom of the education spectrum. 32% of African Americans make less than $50,000 a year and don't have a college degree. So I mean, they're at the very bottom when it comes to SES attainment. What I'm beginning to kind of come around to coalesce to this idea is like dropping out leads to dropping out. So dropping out of college, let's say, or dropping out of like the political sphere, dropping out of any institution in America leads to dropping out in the next institution and the next institution and the next institution. What we're seeing is that people at the bottom of the SES rungs are tending to not really engage in any part of the political process or the religious process. And my thesis is that actually makes their situation worse. If you're white, black, Asian, Hispanic, it doesn't matter, because places like churches and the American Legion and, political organizations can help you out socially to help you climb up, but also can kind of help you economic, because church folks love to help church folks. That's something I've realized. Like if you're a member of church and if you say a need into a congregation and they can meet that need, they're going to meet that need. And so what we're seeing is poor people are dropping out of religion faster than higher SES people are. I think in some ways it's actually making economic inequality worse in America, because those are the kind of people who need those, like they need the bootstraps, and they're kind of cutting their own bootstraps by not being part of these institutions. Now, obviously, I don't want to blame anyone for doing that. They think institutions are failing them, which they are, but it's like a self-perpetuating cycle. They keep dropping out, which leads to more dropping out, which means they're falling further behind, which means they're more disillusioned, which means they drop out more. And I think for a lot of them, they could actually gain some benefit, maybe not from religion, but from being part of a social organization or a political organization or something that would give them some economic mobility and some connections with people.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So I'm going to switch the order because we were talking about education.
Yeah.
And I'm really glad that Prager is here to clarify everything for us. Now, PragerU sent a tweet that said sending your kids to college is playing Russian roulette with their values. And I know that Prager's just a notoriously Ukraine supporter, and maybe that's why they said Russian roulette, as opposed to like
I didn't catch
Wesson.
that, by the way. That was a good job, Tripp. Well done.
Because they wouldn't have said Smith and Wesson roulette, because PragerU and their love of guns. But yeah, your response here. This is empirically and undeniably false. I'm just glad you're clear. This is 14 years of the cooperative election study, and in no year are those with a college degree more likely to be religiously unaffiliated than those who stopped at a high school diploma. So I'm gonna throw the next slide with the stats up, but
boom.
I'd love for you to kind of address where this idea comes from when you're thinking as a sociologist, and then how the data problematizes it.
I think it's, that God's Not Dead movie.
Do I know it?
I know it, Tripp.
Oh, I've got a drinking game bingo chart for it.
Kevin Sorbo, atheist philosophy professor, Nietzsche quoting, and I love the main character's last name is Wheaton, by the way. Like, can it be more on the nose than that? Like the good evangelical kid named Wheaton, and I like how Kevin Sorbo was like, yeah, I'll play the villain. That's great, because he needs money, obviously, but he's also evangelical. That's like a trope. And that movie, by the way, made a crap ton. Like, that's an actual scientific term. A crap ton of money on like a $1 million budget. It made like $100 million. So, I mean, it was like a smash success, because it played into this trope that a lot of young evangelical parents of like teenagers are completely freaked out about their kids' college decision, especially if they choose to go to like a state university, a public university, where they're not just being kind of regurgitated mainstream evangelical theology or philosophy in every class. They're being taught about guys like Nietzsche, right? And the idea of atheism and agnosticism, and we should question everything. And the trope is you go to college, you hear a really smart, charismatic speaker, which, by the way, most college professors are not that charismatic. They're actually the opposite of charismatic. And they're going to convince you that God, that God doesn't exist. As a guy who sat through a lot of talks, Tripp, I can say that with authority. Most academics are not compelling, charismatic speakers. They're just not.
But all the members of your union are the exception.
Oh, everyone at EIU is top tier. We're like the 1% of the 1%, as Bernie would say. We are the absolute peak of all faculty in America. Praise be. And that's the thing is, like, they think like evangelical parents are like so paranoid their kids are gonna like go and like shave their heads and get a bunch of tattoos and start like quoting Nietzsche and leaving religion behind. And I think that they don't understand that there's this thing called the inoculation effect, which is the idea that if you're challenged, your beliefs are challenged in like a safe, receptive, open way, it can actually it reinforces your beliefs more, like getting an inoculation against the flu or whatever. So, challenging kids is actually good because most of them come out of college as religious as they came in, if not more religious. Now, to tie that in with just the conversation we just had, it's a lot of them realize, wow, there's a lot of social value in religion. There's a lot of extrinsic value in religion, and that I create a social network, and all the kind of people I want to be like are in church and in organizations. I want to be like them. So I'll go to church for external reasons, maybe more so than internal reasons. But I guess from my perspective, I don't care why you go. Like I think for a lot of Christians, the answer is, I'm just glad you're happy in the pew every Sunday. That's what we want to see you there for whatever reason. And I think this is increasingly becoming a way that, like, the average person thinks about religion is not correct empirically. We think a bunch of like hillbilly, rural conservative people who barely graduated high school are there at the pews every Sunday handling snakes and talking about, Jesus and the Holy Spirit. When the data says the kind of people who show up to church every Sunday, what peak like attendance is, income and education wise, 4-year college degree making between $60,000 and $100,000 a year. Those are the people that are the most likely to attend church every week, is like upper middle class, college educated people, because they're seeing the extrinsic value. And for them, they don't realize that most evangelical churches are full of people just like that, like driving their big SUVs, living in the suburbs, white collar jobs, 2 perfect kids. And so religion has kind of become the place in America, which is dangerous for like the people who have done everything right, got married, had kids, got a college degree, got a good, stable job, flexible job, then go to church. They have time to do different activities with the church. And the people who are dropping out are people who say, like, got divorced or had kids out of wedlock or never got a college degree or don't have a shift work where they can't make it to church a certain time. And I think we're getting more of like the haves and the have-nots, and like political polarization, religious polarization are sorting themselves out. And the people who are in church in America are the people who did everything right. And that gulf between them and everyone else is growing every year. And I think that's actually bad for the future of American Christianity, but it's also bad for the future of America, like democracy-wise, because you don't want monocultures in organizations. You want them to be diverse, and they're becoming less diverse all the time.
We don't want monocultures. I thought the world worked so much better if all the people you spend with share your own implicit biases and then project it as a natural interpretation of the world.
Well, in Sweden, that works really well for them, by the way.
Oh, look, you're trolling Steven. Yeah. The other chart you shared in this or graph I find really helpful because the assumption right underneath the tweet by Prager University is and it's similar. You can see it playing out in a lot of the kind of right-wing fear of public schools, both in generating Christian schools and fighting to defund public schools to fund private ones, but also fights about curriculum or canceling books and all this kind of stuff. Is the idea that the secret hidden agenda of education is to destroy the religious, spiritual, moral fiber, etc. of good Bible believing Christians. And I like looking at this. I just could imagine, going like, actually, we just need to get more people with grad degrees. Here's what we need. If you want your kids to have they continue to participate in the religious tradition and be uplifted by a historic wisdom tradition, inform their lives and give meaning, purpose, and value, and inspire commitment to community and seeking justice and investing in the democracy and life-giving ways for the whole, then what they need is a master's degree. That should really be the new branding for the church. Like, we need more master's degrees. Keep them alive.
Well, think about what I was just told you. Like, the most likely people to attend are those with college degrees with $60,000 to $100,000 of income. That's master's degree people, right? That's people with MBAs and masters in education. Like, that's, to me, it's like, in my mind, it's like, pick someone who's a prototypical churchgoer. That's the person, right? With an MBA or a master's education, white collar job, decent income. And by the way, even people with doctorates, which you can hardly ever find people with doctorates in a sample because we're only about 1% of the population overall. So it's really hard to, get a good sample. This whole sample is like 500,000 people. So there's 9,000 people with doctorates, and only 24% of them are nuns, which is exactly the same percentage as people with 4-year college degrees. And amongst high school grads, it's 28%. So even people who have doctorate degrees are less likely to be nuns than people with a high school diploma or less. So, I mean, just from my personal experience, everyone, the plural of anecdotes, not data, but I'll just tell you from my experience in academia, there are very few people who are outwardly hostile to religion in academia. I think they all understand like the social, little d democratic value of religion. They see the organizational value that it has to society. They might not believe in this stuff, the supernatural stuff, but they're not like outright hostile to. They're more like a meh approach to religion. There's hardly anyone ever like brings their atheist or agnostic views into the classroom in like any meaningful way. And I think for most people, like getting a master's degree is a professional degree, but getting a doctorate's like an inquiry degree, like a more like open-minded like inquiry into like being a real academic. I think for a lot of them, they realize, wow, I barely know enough about my field to make a dent on it. And I don't know that much about religion or God to, like have a real strong grasp of it. So they're definitely a lot more, it makes you certain of less things, but open to more ideas. And I think that's the thing about education people don't realize. It doesn't indoctrinate you except in the idea of like challenging everything you believe and thinking about other things. And for most people, that does not make them hostile or really warm to religion. It just kind of makes them understand it as a concept in American life that matters. And so they're not going to try to like push you away from that. They're just going to say, hey, this exists. Let's talk about what it means and then move on.
So, my experience thinking of like when you pointed that out is especially being in the academy and dealing with graduate students and PhD students, it's fascinating to me when they realize, well, you're also clergy, and then they kind of test out the story they tell themselves to justify their religious participation, and and so they give what amounts to some kind of intellectual framework. But what they really wanted to tell me, like at the University of Edinburgh, is like I love the liturgy and the community of the Scottish Episcopal
Mm-hmm.
Church, or
Mm-hmm.
I don't really know if there is such thing as no self, but my Buddhist collective does this. Like it was always a it, they experience the need to justify a practice
Yep.
that they know is beneficial and important to them. And intellectuals do that for all sorts of things. Like it's like the Democratic Party trying to justify why working class people don't vote for them, even though they run elections on issues that aren't directly related to working class life, because all their friends have graduate degrees. It's like if you don't pay attention, like if you imagine the only people you're justifying yourself to are the kind of intellectuals come up with it, like there's a whole group in philosophy now that go by religious fictionalist, and everything about them is they participate in like the Anglican Church in the UK. They're just completely bracketing all metaphysical statements, but they go every week, baptized, communion, everything. And I just think I find that interesting, because if you told like an angry nun that doesn't have multiple degrees, that isn't professionally connected to mystery and lack of clarity on big topics, they'd be like, that just sounds weird. Like, what do you mean you're going to operate and bracket the metaphysical claims, but give your family's rhythm to a mythopoetic structure? Like, huh? But like nerds hear it and they're like, oh, I mean, I understand. I can be deeply moved by all sorts of giant narratives. Such, you're like, hmm.
But from my perspective, like people go, well, you atheist churchgoers. And I'm like, yeah, atheist churchgoers. Like that's a real thing. Like, why can't it be a thing? Like, there's a guy in my department a couple years ago. He's a Methodist. He goes, I don't believe in God at all, but I go because I like what the church does for the community and for like social justice, racial justice. I was like, who am I to say? You know what I mean? Like, you don't have to. Religion's a multifaceted thing. Beliefs just people think religion's belief. It's not. It's not for me. My perspective, belief's actually less important than belonging. You're saying like I'm a United Methodist. I'm throwing in with those people. Even though I don't believe what they believe about Jesus, I still like what they do. And to me, that says I'm still identifying as United Methodist. And that to me is really, really important, because it says I intellectually say I'm an atheist, but socially say I'm a United Methodist. And that's really, really important from a social science perspective.
Yeah, and recently I think it was something you tweeted, or one of my other friends that are into data, what was talking about how in Gen Z, if you ask questions of religious identity, like, oh, do you identify as X, and it's a brand or a label or whatever, down. If you ask them, well, do you believe in God or a higher power that's a source of existence, and like belief ideas, then you don't see as much change if you ask them just like, what's your like the volume of the individuals that are like, oh yeah, I think the Bible's good for morals and understanding the world and stuff like that. And so I feel like one of the shifts that we wrestle with in thinking about religious identity, and a lot of the changing data is an ongoing shift about how the self in a kind of late modern world experiences institutions and the act of identification. And because so much of modernity, religion and modernity, especially in the West, definitely more in the West, beliefs became boundary markers as we, post Protestantism come, invention of Protestantism. Then we think, oh, the main things about being religious are believing the right thing, which connects you to their true, authentic biblical Christianity, and that's how we have all these denominations. But as the kind of intellectual awareness that exists in the academy, that theologians have been trying to wrestle with for a long time, those questions and influence, like it's now like the common person's questions and tasks to wrestle with, then I think it sets up a moment where we need, as religious traditions, to re-articulate a concept of identity that isn't defining ourselves by beliefs over against the other people in our own tribe, and definitely by salvation over against those in outside. But anyway, have do you have thoughts on that kind of shift where an individual may actually affirm the content of an identity and reject the label, where if you looked at their grandparents, they're like there's a tighter correlation between convictions and identity.
So we on the 2021 GSS, they asked people when you can say what's your current religion. You say none of the above, and then it would give you another question. Usually, it would just stop there, right? Just you're a none. It would ask, do you consider yourself an atheist, agnostic, or none of this stuff, right? So then you can self-identify as atheist, which is interesting. And then there's a belief question, like what do you believe about God? From God doesn't exist to I have no doubt God exists. And only 70% of people who said they're atheists said God doesn't exist. Like still 30% of them were like, yeah, I'm willing to like think about the idea. And amongst agnostics, like half of them said, I believe in a higher power sometimes. Like they did not pick the agnostic option. So it kind of shows you like the people who think about religion all day are not the people who take these surveys. You know what I mean? Like they're not thinking about religion at all or very, very little. And for them, you can be an atheist in affiliation, but not an atheist in belief. Like that's totally fine with them. I think people get too pedantic on surveys. If you say you're an atheist who goes to church every Sunday, who am I to say you're not? Especially if I see other things in the data that make it look like you're actually doing those things. That's what you are. You know what I mean? Like I'm sorry, but you can be all those things at one time, which leads perfectly into this next graph, Tripp, which got me in a lot of trouble.
Oh, you look! I just want you to know that transition, Ryan. That is the kind of guy that gets tenure right there. You just you just brought it. So, the share of each tradition that self-identifies as evangelical / born again.
That's right.
And I want everyone to know this is like we're recording this in the AM. I'm drinking bubble water. There's no altered states other than coffee that generated this conversation. But I 39%. This is nuts. Okay, lay out what in the world we're looking at and why we should not send an email to your school questioning your status before tenure.
So this is this huge survey called Nationscape, which is like 475,000 people. So you can't hit me with sample size. As soon as I put this graph out, it goes, oh, I bet you got 12 people in each of those cells on there. I'm like, nope. Actually, the smallest one's over 600 people. So like every one of these bars represents almost all of them represent at least 1,000 respondents. So which in survey world, 1,000 respondents is your top level in. This is 475,000 at the top level. So this is like the largest publicly available survey that exists. They ask what your religion is. And then they ask everybody, do you identify as a born again or evangelical Christian or not? It's a yes or no question, right? It's a binary question. And people go, they like act offended. They're even asked that question. I go, just say no. Like, you don't have to be offended by that. Just say no. If someone asks me like, if I after I said I was a a mainline Protestant, you said, "Are you an atheist or not?" I just say no. I wouldn't be offended by that. Like it's just a question. And so here's where people get tripped up. What they think is happening is what's called survey error, which is that people are taking these surveys. All they care about is getting paid at the end of the survey, like the $20 Amazon gift card. And so they're speeding through it, just sort of mashing buttons on the browser as fast as they can to get to the end so they can get their money. Now, a couple things about that. One, speeders are automatically kicked out by every major survey firm in America. They create like a benchmark time of like what the average person does, and they give you a little bit of leeway on the bottom end. But if you go below that, then they kick you, thinking you did speed through it, you didn't take your time. They also have what are called attention checks, which is they ask you like they'll be like 4 questions in a row, and for like the third one, will say check box 3. So if you don't hit past the attention checks, you don't get paid either. So there are tons of ways to kick these people out who don't know what they're doing and are kind of just mashing buttons. So that's a screen first off. But secondly, okay, let's say that did get through somehow. You got to explain to me. So survey error is supposed to be random. So if I'm just mashing buttons, that's going to randomize out like in the data. So you're going to see weird stuff like the patterns don't line up. But if I said to you, what kind of Jew would be more likely to self-identify as evangelical? Would it be a Republican Jew or a Democrat Jew? I think everyone on planet Earth would say a Republican would probably be more likely to say yes than a Democrat. And guess what we see? Republican Jews are more likely to say yes than Democrats. So are Hindus, and so are Buddhists, and so are Muslims. And if it's Republican every time, that is not random anymore. That is theoretically driven. There's a case to be made that it's always the only time where it's even close is Orthodox Christians and Catholics, which is an interesting kind of question to like dig into why they don't split big time. But of the non-Christian religions, it's always Republicans are much more likely to say they're born again than Democrats. That cannot be random in a sample this large. It has to be theoretical. And the theoretical grounding is that evangelical is seen as Republican, as a political identity, a cultural marker, not a theological assent, right? But a more like who am I in theological space? And to be conservative in America, whether you're a Jew, a Muslim, or a Protestant, to be conservative means you're more likely to be an evangelical. And I'm sorry if that doesn't fit in your theological box, but you don't own theology. You don't get to say to people you can't be. To me, that's so by the way, the left is the one who gives me the most guff over this stuff. Stop being so patriarchal. You can't tell people you can't be these things because they're telling you on surveys in very large numbers now, yes, I am. You want to like pat them on the head and go, no, you're too stupid to know what you are. No, they're not too stupid to know what they are. They know what they are, which is I'm a Republican Jew, and Republicans tend to be evangelical, and I like what that means culturally and politically. So I will mark yes on that box. Thank you very much. I don't care what your rabbi tells you about me. Here's what I am. I mean, stop being gatekeepers,
Mm-hmm. Oh no, I mean, I saw the replies when you tweeted this.
They were not nice.
No, it was not. It was not. I mean, I don't think they demonstrated the sweet love of baby Jesus in their heart.
Well, they call me idiot. Like this guy's an idiot. He should never do data analysis again. Like I'm just like mashing buttons. Like this is the first graph I've ever made in my life, guys. Just throwing ideas out there.
It is a it is fascinating because I mean, you've mentioned this in one of our previous chats, but just like the way in which words like evangelical, right? Like initially it was just Protestants. Then it becomes an identity marker in American religious history that then gets fought over. It used to be kind of the opposite of fundamentalist and kind of free church Protestantism in America. Then fundamentalists kind of come to own evangelical space, turn it into predominantly, right, like the religious right as a organizing group for the religious right. And what do? They end up early on partnering with other Catholics, and you get the switch from the kind of fundamentalist primarily looking to keep segregated private schools to we're going to switch to the pro-life issue and do that. And over time, you see it the bringing in of the other Abrahamic faiths to organize politically for all these kinds of things. So over time, evangelical, which it kind of first emerges as a distinction to Catholic in most European spaces, becomes a category that is kind of right-wing committed religious people across traditions because they see that binding of in some sense of religious and political identity. And I wonder what you see the evidence right in this. And when people push back against it and things, what are the assumptions you think we carry that we need to deconstruct in a sense to really understand the religious political marketplace? Like, are there kind of like obvious tropes that show up in the responses where you attending to the data go, well, you're assuming X, Y, and Z, and that's how we keep messing up at understanding the larger political and religious conversation.
Well, a lot of it is people feel like it's marginalized religious groups in America. Like, why are you trying to evangelicalize everyone? Like, why don't you ask people if they're Reformed Jew, or, like, why is the evangelical question gets asked to everyone? It's like almost like a patriarchal thing. Like, why does everyone have to be evangelical to you? Why is everything from a Christian perspective to you? I get that at some level, right? Like, I understand that argument. I've thought about that argument a lot. But again, no matter how much some people don't like this fact, like 3% of Americans are Jews, okay? And a majority of Americans are Christians. 1% are Muslims, 1% are Jews. So, or 3% are Jews, 1% are Hindus. So, what do I do with that as a researcher? Do I make 1% of my graphs about Hindus? Do I make 50% of my graphs? So there's this whole like equity idea that goes on, like this discussion, especially on the left, is we want to raise up marginalized voices. And my point is, if I do a survey of 1,000 people, which costs me $5,000, I will get 15 Muslims on that survey. I can't. Then someone goes, no, you should not be so worried about getting a random sample. It's about getting a sample that reflects these smaller groups. So what you're telling me is you should be less interested in doing empirically rigorous science and more interested in elevating the voices of minority groups. I do not believe that as a fundamental fact of who I am. To me, empirics comes first and everything else comes second after that. I am not going to do a piss poor sample just to elevate a group that you think is being marginalized in America. We need to fully understand how large groups are. That is not to say their voices don't matter. But when the media is writing stories about like the Hindu vote in America, I want to throw things at the wall because like they're less than 1% of America. If you can change the minds of like 2% of evangelicals, that's miles more work than changing half of all Hindus. So like, how do we square those two ideas? That we care about marginalized groups and minority groups in America, but we also understand when it comes to elections, every vote counts as one vote. And there's a heck of a lot more Christian votes in America than there are any other, smaller group. I don't know how to get around that problem without making people mad, especially on the left, that I'm sort of not talking enough about these small groups when they really statistically don't matter that much in national elections.
Yeah. Yeah, I think part of that though is one of those where you go, if you just understood data literacy, then you would realize, like the 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 ethical commitment you're vocalizing. You're like, I share. I'm a mainline Protestant minister. Like these kinds of like equity, inclusion, affirming the religious diversity of America, and that's yes. If you're asking about like how as a doing data to understand the religious marketplace, then that's a different that is not the value that's being centered there is gaining knowledge and clarity about the populace versus remaking the populace, which is what those of us that are faith leaders are more invested in that space. But do you think that you mentioned this last time about politics so impacting religious identity in America that now sounding Christian is sounding Republican. And Brian McLaren, his newest book is Do I Stay Christian? And we just finished earlier this week online book group with it with a couple thousand people in it. And there were probably 30 or 40 or so churches doing the group along with us. And I asked the ministers to send in like the big question that was in those congregations. Now, they're obviously self-selected. They're the kind of people that listen to Homebrewed and they're like, oh, now I can have a small group, So they're mainline Protestants or kind of the edgy evangelical types or liberal Catholics, like a collection of Jesuits anyway. But the biggest question that came back from ministers, not from their question, but primarily the congregants that were doing this book study, was were variations of, Look, if you're asking me, am I committed to this community and the way of Jesus? Yeah. But Christian? Like, I'm not really sure all the time about the ideas that we have to believe. Insert the things conservative, Republican, evangelicals say you have to believe. And if you don't really believe all these things, can you even really be Christian? Or maybe we should have a different kind of community. And and I understand that. And I just think these are from the communities who 30 years ago were the dominant expression of Protestantism in America, right? Like the Methodist Church or the Episcopal Church and these kinds of things. So the like thinking about that shift and what would ever get asked on a survey, there's not a religious identity that exists in the public square where you go, well, are you evangelical? And we know kind of what that means if you say yes, right? Like enough that people of other religious traditions choose it. um it, when if you were thinking about faith leadership, is there a point, or should it be something we spend effort in so that there is a kind of referent where people know, like, I am Christian and this is, and I'm not that? Because I think most progressives and more moderate Christians feel their uncomfortability with the term is political, and and then it leads to all the kind of confusion and angst, that we got in the group. But there's not a term on the survey where then they go like, oh, oh, you're a mainline Protestant or whatever, or you're, a progressive Christian or a justice seeker. Like, there's no shorthand for, if you identify with this, what animates your part of what animates your faith is a commitment to the common good or whatever. And even in the Catholic Church, the Pope can write 500 pages of encyclicals saying capitalism is killing the planet and we need solidarity of the species and to our non-human neighbors and all that kind of stuff. And there's not like a shared identity. Not so much like in the data side, but how does that understanding of data frame how we could communicate better as I don't know, people of faith that would like to joyfully, embrace a religious identity without always defining it in the negative, like, oh, we're not insert,
Well,
something.
yeah, like, I mean, Connie in the side race says, I'm white, but don't understand this white Christianity anymore. Like that's the sentiment I get a lot from, people on the left, especially I mean, I think I'm a Christian, but I don't know. I would say from a data standpoint, still call yourself Christian, please, because like that's what you are socially, like that's how you orient yourself in social space. If you still see yourself that way, please still call yourself Protestant or Christian on surveys, because that's helpful for me. But I also think it's really hard to, no one owns, I say that I feel like I'm a linguist. I'm not a linguist. No one owns words. No one owns what the word evangelical means, just like no one owns what the word Christian means. And I wrote this piece, I published an article, a journal article, which turned into a CT piece, where I basically said that young people don't even know what the word Protestant means anymore. And I think for especially liberal Christians, I think they should embrace the word Protestant a lot more, because that seems like in these non-denominational evangelical churches, they're not using the word Protestant at all. Like they don't talk about Martin Luther or like, historical theology. They say we're Christians. They all say it's not a religion, it's a relationship, right? So they're trying to like walk away from all like the old school trappings. And I think it might be an interesting like movement in American Christianity where a lot of liberals say, I'm not Christian, I'm Protestant. And a lot of a lot of evangelicals say, I'm a Christian, not a Protestant. When they're all Protestants, they just don't, they don't want to embrace that terminology. I'll give you an example. The Southern Baptist Convention, J.D. Greear was the president 2 presidents ago. He tried to kind of change the name to Great Commission Baptists. No one talks about that. You know what I mean? Like as soon as that guy left, everyone's like, well, let's get rid of all that literature, guys. Let's get rid of all that branding, because, it's hard to change what words mean. And it almost never, especially because of the way the internet works, it never happens top down. It always is a word that changes from the bottom up. Like the word stan used to mean a guy, like your old janitor at school. And now it means like, I really love this kind of person. I stan that person. You know where that came from? Bottom up, not top down. No one chose that from top down. Same thing with the word Christian or Protestant. I think if you really want to make a change, it's got to happen organically, and it's also got to happen like from the bottom. I don't know, man. Like I'm a Christian. I still say I'm a Christian. I still say I'm an American Baptist. I'm proud of my American Baptist heritage, even though sometimes I don't like what they do. But at some point, it's like it's like your family. right? Like sometimes you don't like what your family is and what they do, but you're always part of that family. That's kind of how I believe about my faith, right? Like I don't love what they do half the time, but I'm still, and even I walk into evangelical spaces and people ask me, I was at Wheaton a couple weeks ago. Someone asked me about evangelical. I go, I'm evangelical sympathetic. I'm evangelical adjacent. Like I have a lot of feeling about that. You know, I feel like I still have a lot of warm feeling about that, but I don't identify as that anymore. I think that's kind of the nuance that we need now in the conversation, which is I don't hate that version. I'm just not that thing anymore, you know?
Yeah, yeah. All right, we had two more graphs. So we'll do this one quick because I enjoyed getting messages about our commentary on higher education last time from
Yeah.
the generation above us that gave poor life advice. Anyway, um, but this one, religious
Yeah.
service attendance drive conservative political views regardless of race.
Mm-hmm.
So
Mm-hmm.
yeah, here we go.
Yep. I mean, the thing is, I think it's like a white thing, right? Like more white people go to church, the more politically conservative they are. Or maybe the more Hispanic people go. Guess what? It's every racial group in America. The more they go to religious service, this is not just church, by the way, this is just all religious services. The more they go to religious services, the more conservative they become. Now, the slope of the line is interesting, right? So for white people, it's very steep. It's that top blue line up there. So, I mean, obviously that's steeper. But even amongst black people, amongst never attending black people, 10% identify as politically conservative. But amongst those who go more than once a week, it's 25% identify as politically conservative. So, I mean, amongst every group, religion, more religious you are, the more likely you are to be conservative. I know there's people in your audience like, well, I go to church a lot and I become more liberal. You are an outlier, my friend. Like, that is not what the data says the trend line
Well,
is.
look, Ryan, I want you to know homebrewed Christianity has been corrupting nerdy moderate Christians since 2008, slowly luring them over to a non-omnipotent deity with a robust critique of consumer capitalism. That's it's our we've just been working for the evil one, you know.
And the penchant for good beer in these weekend retreats.
Well, I look, you can't. Oops, sorry, I hit mute. You gotta do it. You gotta do it when you gotta get their defenses down. And since most of them have religious trauma, we can't do 20 minutes of worship music first. So I'm like,
Wait, did you do worship music at this thing?
no. The only Christian song we did was Jesus Freak by DC Talk. And it was I would just say it was done as a form of therapeutic nostalgia but I would say two of the three DC Talk members messaged about appreciating the commitment
I'm
that
gonna bet you. I can tell you right now who it wasn't that messaged you. I know exactly who it was.
I gotta well
I would. By the way, anybody out there, please do a documentary of like the rise and fall of DC Talk. I would watch the heck out of that.
yeah well you look when we're not recording I have some stories to tell you
Good,
about
because
that but
those guys are so different now, and I want to know like how in the world they like stuck together as long as they did, because they weren't getting along great, like the height of Supernatural or whatever.
you the fascinating thing to me and I mean I've talked to Kevin about this is uh he's like at some point they decided, oh, um we have all these experiences together and did and like gave deep joy to people and they've ended up in different places just like us, but there's no reason we still shouldn't be friends. And to go from, if you think of just where all three of them came, that like they are like stand-ins for what happened to 90s evangelicalism.
Yeah.
So like some of us end up like Kevin and like with a hippie socialist universalist Christian vibe, and then you got like Toby that's like much more thoughtful and engaged in a broader type of way and trying to give evangelicalism a new center that's not so toxic. And then you got a laying hands on Donald Trump at a prayer breakfast style in Michael Tate. And so I feel like the documentary there, right? Like it could be fun inside stuff, but also the trajectories of evangelicalism. But if
Yeah.
it
Like,
ends with
yeah.
them being friends, maybe we can. It would be something beautiful enough to say, like, hey, like it's cool to have friends are wrong. I mean, like
Absolutely.
I'm your friend, And I
And
don't.
I'm wrong all the time.
Oh yeah, especially if we talk about birth rates.
Hey, Ken Burns, call him up. I'm sure he'd love to do this.
Yeah, he's like, look, you've done wars, you've done baseball. Like, have I got an idea for you? Hmm?
Broad
What happens?
appeal. Broad appeal, everybody.
Yeah, you may think it's strange, but how many people actually are best friends with someone born in a manger? A lot. We got the data to back it up. So,
But how many kids knew DC Talk? Like growing up with us? A lot. The answer is a lot, Tripp. I mean,
yeah,
it was a cultural phenomenon, not just in our niche, but like in the broader subculture. So
yeah, yeah. That's what I'm talking about.
I'm here
So,
for it. Let's do it. Someone do it, please. Thank you.
all right. So, now our last one, but you have two graphs for this one, Ryan.
Yeah. Yeah.
Is about theological education. And I just should probably tell everyone in advance, like I may or may not have bitterness that I spent 40 years of my life trying to get to the point where I could teach systematic theology. And basically have been working at it since I was 16 and have 50 lectures for the year-long systematic theology written out, and moved my family across our country and then across the world, thinking that if you did a PhD, had a book series and all these kinds of things, and leadership and academics, do a postdoc at a top 10 religion program and stuff, like I don't know, would get a job. Didn't happen, but I got the debt. So just that's my heads up for if I sound bitter in
You are a
any of this.
crotchety old man. You know that?
I know, but nonetheless, these are the 20 largest seminaries in the United States based on headcount. Only one's a mainline seminary or Protestant seminary,
Yeah.
because we're like
We're
not
using that
branding,
word.
like we're the
Yep.
Protestants.
Mm-hmm.
Duke, home of the worst basketball team in the world. That one of my deep joys is to watch them lose. Hashtag Go Deeks. So of the 20,000 plus students are represented here, 97% of them are being trained in evangelical seminaries. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
so if you were worried that you weren't going to be haunted this week um, during Halloween, just think about the future of American Christianity.
But it just, to me, I got this the idea came from me from Mark Wingfield, who runs Baptist News Global. And he like did a little piece on like the ATS data, which is like American Theological Seminaries. It's like an association that accredits seminaries in
Oh yeah,
America.
yeah. I
Yeah.
was the student lead for when ATS accreditation went through Wake Div,
Yeah.
and yeah, well,
It's
it
good. I
may or
mean,
may not be a racket. We don't know,
it
but
probably is, but at least they have data for me, which
yeah,
like it's hard to find clearinghouses of data, like where you can find it all in like a reasonably digestible format. And they don't make it that digestible, by the way, because they make it like in these PDF spreadsheets, which suck. I gotta like convert them into like an Excel file and clean everything up. But what I was really thinking about a lot was like, if you want to see what the future of American religion looks like, this is like a great canary in the coal mine of like what we're going to look like in 10, 20, 30 years. Because if you're not training up a lot of mainline pastors, they're not going to go into the world and make anyone mainline. 97%. I mean, look at Liberty. This is FTE count, by the way, which every
oh
school
yeah,
does it differently. And Ligon Duncan got on my thread, which is really cool because I'm like, wow, this guy's actually pay attention to me. Not that I agree with him on theological things. I think he's a big player in this field. And, I kind of respect the fact he reformed theological seminary to this huge behemoth now in the world. Everybody does FTE headcount differently, but I don't want to get, I don't want to get like into the weeds of like how to like do it's full-time equivalent is what FTE stands for, by the way. So if you have like 2 half-time students, that's 1 FTE, is at least the way the system's supposed to work. It gets a little chippy when you get to like 3/4 time or like one class, or like how do you count those people? But like Liberty is cranking them out, dude, like 3,700 FTE headcount, which is like twice as large as the next largest seminary. But you start
yeah,
going down the list, they're almost all Southern Baptist or like heavy evangelical Southern Baptist style of seminary. And I mean, the biggest ones are just dominating the world. And then you have like Duke has like a couple hundred. I mean, it's just like
yeah.
it's David and Goliath now when it comes to seminary education. And you've got to kind of wonder going forward, like most of these seminaries in the mainline tradition are going to have to consolidate and close like the other branches because you just can't afford 5 American Baptist seminaries or 5 United Methodist seminaries or 5 Episcopalian seminaries when the SBC is just, I mean, cranking them out, and they got their 6 or 7. Now, one's not doing very good. They just announced layoffs today, but a lot of them are growing pretty significantly. They've grown like doubled in the last 20 years. So I mean, this tells you where American Christianity is going. It is going in a hard right-wing evangelical direction, and there's no doubt about that.
Yeah. So one of the things that came to mind, I've thought about this when you tweeted it, and I wonder what you think. So in North Carolina, for example, I went to undergrad at Campbell University, and there's a host of Baptist undergrads. And when I went, early 2000s, if you're a North Carolina Baptist and a religion major, the state convention of Baptists give a scholarship, right? And and this was before the state starts splitting apart. Like you had all the most of the Baptists were all in the state convention, and then people start splitting off. Like they got rid of my dad running chaplains at the fair because we had gay people at church, and you're like, somehow that really makes you wonder. Like he obviously couldn't help lost kids find their parents at the state fair because one of the singers at the worship band is a homosexual. Anyway, but that's how state Baptist life was. But one of the results of this was Southeastern opens an undergrad, the Southern Baptist School in Wake Forest. Which really, I grew up in the town of Wake Forest. I pissed off the locals because that's why Wake Forest, the college, moved to Winston-Salem, is they didn't want it growing anymore, right? And so there was all this ugliness in the town. And what do? Then they're like, well, you should start giving the same scholarship to go to Southeastern undergrad for religion, and we will subsidize everyone else. So the cheapest Baptist religion degree, if you don't want to go in debt, is at Southeastern's new undergrad. Then Liberty says we have a lot of affiliated schools in North Carolina and our online program. So can our online school get the same funding? So the result of this, in hopes to keep people together, is that it then became 5 or 6 times more expensive to go to an actual university with a religion and philosophy department at a Baptist school to get a religion degree than to go to Southeastern or Liberty. And I understand, right? Anyone that doesn't have means going, I think I'd rather go for free to school than to go in debt. And so the state convention, they were strategic about taking over theological education for future ministers, right? And so the religion departments have shrunk significantly over time because they end up there. Same thing, kind of stuff happened in campus ministry. If you're like one of the other graphs, it could be fascinating, is the number of people in campus ministries for Protestants and evangelicals, and the funding for it. So you started having fights in the state denomination. What gets cut first at a church? Ministers for children and youth and college students. What gets cut first in denominations? Campus ministry, summer camps, and mission trip experiences, and all the kinds of things that generate the spaces where you feel called to ministry, spaces where your religious identity is practiced, and all that kind of stuff. So I feel like, this graph connects to one of the things we talked about last time, how bad Protestants are about utilizing resources for their future well-being, right?
Absolutely. I mean, think
about Baptist to like the Episcopal church and vice versa.
Take all that money you got and say, you know what, if you want to get a theology degree with us and want to commit to, let's say, 3 years of ministry, we'll pay for your entire theological education. Like lock, stock, and it's like a public loan forgiveness thing, except in there, inside that denomination, say, if you give us X years, we'll take 20% off for every year you serve in a qualified ministry role, just to give people. My department chair, her daughter is in the ELCA. She's getting her entire seminary degree for free. And I'm like, if the main line doesn't want to absolutely just get killed over the next 20 years, they need to make it cheap or free to go get an education in a mainline seminary. Because let's be honest here, Tripp, they got the money. I mean, there's money there in those pockets if they can move it around a certain kind of way or make it really, really cheap. There's nothing that stops that from happening. Let's say you've got a church that's got 50 people, but you got a ton of money in the bank, $1 million in the bank, and you can't find a pastor. How about say, we'll sponsor you to come be our pastor. And if you go to get educated, we'll take care of your loan for you after a couple of years once you work for us. I mean, everybody wins there. The young person wins, you win, you get a pastor, you use the money for a good cause. I think a good cause. I mean, Southern Baptists can't do that because they just have so many stinking students, you could never afford to do something like that, like at a grand scale. If the mainline, you know what, at some point, we always talk about like being called, but man, money changes your calling sometimes. Like if you can't afford to go, you're not going to go, whether God calls you or not. So make that part easier. And even amongst liberals who don't like to talk about money when it comes to things like this, it's about money at some level. We want to go. Everyone gets a free education or a cheap education. So why not make that easier for people, you know?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And the other graph you had on there, is the
it's about like how they do denominations. ATS has a weird like denominational like they have something called interdenominational, which is like basically evangelical. Like you look at the schools, you're like, yep, those are evangelicals. But I mean, if you look like I couldn't even put the Episcopalians on here or the United Church of Christ or the Disciples of Christ because they were not in the top 10. I mean, there are 327 seminarians in the Disciples of Christ right now, and less than 500 United Church of Christ and just 550 Episcopalians compared to 7,371 in Southern Baptist seminaries. And you better believe that a lot of people in those interdenominational ones are going to end up in Southern Baptist churches too, or evangelical, flavored Southern Baptist churches. So, I mean, it is just David and Goliath, apples and oranges. Like there is no mainline theological education at any scale that matches anywhere close. I bet you if you added up all the mainline seminarians in America today from all the seminaries, from all the traditions, they would not equal the number who are just in Southern Baptist theological training right now.
You mean all the Protestants don't outnumber the Southern Baptists?
That Tripp, you're doing the branding, and I love it. Let's keep it going. Yeah, all the Protestants do not equal the evangelicals right now, not even close.
So when I have been a part of things related to ATS twice, one of the conversations, I mean, being an organizing, like a committee that does oversees groups while those institutions are in decline, be it a church or the academy and things, is, it's not a nice place to be, and generates all sorts of anxiety. But if you look at some of the data people have on Protestant ministers, the number, like the average IQ of an incoming Protestant minister has dropped. And things like that, and the number of people, even percentage-wise, in their feeder programs, if you're looking at stuff coming in like campus ministry and stuff, the percentage that want to or show interest in is lower. So I wonder if part of it is if this is something that's testable, that the prestige for a Protestant minister for mainline Protestant when they were culture dominant, it was a lot higher. So it was competitive. So you had smarter, more gifted communicators, and these kinds of things get valued and pushed up and celebrated. So, Reinhold Niebuhr never got a PhD, but he brought together first generation Germans and a normal Lutheran church in Detroit, organized for justice, all these kinds of things, write books. He's a super nerd. And then, 6 or 7 years later, he's the most influential theologian in America. But, you're not surprised when you look at his wit and smarts and ability to communicate that he gets moved up. That's not how Protestants work right now. It's not a celebrated position. You don't get social clout. You probably come up with, just talking to my Protestant minister friends that are single, you have to come up with weird ways to mention on dating sites that you're like, I work for a faith-based nonprofit towards community building, but if you are an evangelical minister, you're going to say, like, I'm a minister of the gospel of Jesus Christ. And the people you want to date are going to go, yeah. So is there a way to test the influence, right, of the prestige for the vocation impacting the numbers that want to go, but also, who ends up self-selecting?
That's a good question. I mean, you got to think, like, who is a person who would like, I want to go to Southern Baptist Theological Seminary right now? Like, what's that 18, 19, 20-year-old kid look like who's like, I'm going to finish my degree now. I would love to see their intake numbers in terms of like where those people got their undergraduate degrees from, those who go to Southern Baptist, seminaries. I bet you dollars to donuts that most of them went to evangelical undergraduates as well. You're not seeing the state university route and then into the Southern Baptist route. But I think for the mainline, you're probably seeing a lot more of like the state route or like private liberal arts, not really Christian institutions who end up going into mainline seminaries. It's like, it's a totally different world. Like, these kids at like 14, 15 are basically being told you should be a pastor. In the mainline, I don't think that happens a lot, by the way. I don't think first of all, there's not that many young people in the main line to begin with, let's be honest. But they're definitely not pointing these kids and going, you should be a pastor someday. Like I think Southern Baptists or evangelicals are really good at. I think that's something they like the main line can learn something. It's like you got to find a 15, 16, 17-year-old kid and go, you are showing signs that I think you would be a great religious leader someday. Let's make that happen. Let's talk about financial ways to make that happen, logistical ways to make that happen. Let's find ways to support you to make that happen. The Southern Baptists, I grew up Southern Baptist. You heard all the time about calling and about, being equipped for missions and all those kind of things. I don't think the main line does a good job of that. And honestly, this sounds terrible. Kids are suggestible, especially when you're 16, 17, 18, 19. The big thing that college professors do as an impact is just suggest ideas to kids. Like maybe you should go to grad school. I think you're good enough to go to grad school. That one sentence by itself has launched 1,000 graduate degrees and PhDs because those kids don't believe in themselves. And if I tell them, like, I think you can hack it in grad school, that's all that matters to them. My very first time I ever preached, I was 20 years old. A guy that came to church, never said a word to anyone. I sat in the back and just left, as soon as it was done. When I was done my first sermon, he walks up, shakes my hand and go, "You've got something," and walked off. That was enough for me. You know what I mean? Like that was enough for me to stay in ministry for the last 20 years. That one little sentence comment. I think we need to be a lot more thoughtful about how we do that with young people. And if you are around young people, be willing to talk to them about things like vocation. And I mean, for guys like Tripp, I mean, you can say like, here's the path I took. Here's why it was good. And here's why it probably wasn't good. Learn from me. I will help you get where you want to go. I think that's an incredibly valuable thing that we can do.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I do think part of it is if you look at the marketing that's successful for Protestant seminaries, a lot of it is marketing towards any vocational outcome other than congregational ministry. The advent of a lot of the hybrid degrees and such. We'll do a master's in like business and MDiv, or we do a law degree and an MDiv and that kind of thing, or masters that aren't divinity degrees, but like a master's in like nonprofit management or community organizing and stuff. That and I think that's because even if those people end up doing a full MDiv later and serving in a congregation, if you ask a 22-year-old thinking about what they're going to do if they are a Protestant, and you're like, do you want to be a community organizer? Like Barack Obama, and or like, do you want to like help develop cooperatively owned businesses? Then you can read Just to See Religion things and get that degree. If you look at the Protestant seminaries whose increase in enrollment and decrease, a lot of it is connected to finding ways of handing off theological education for people wanting to serve in ways that are celebrated among more, religiously progressive types, either new degrees or new programs and such. And I only know that just because how many of them sponsor stuff on the podcast, and I know click-through rates on things and all that kind of stuff. But one of the things that I don't, it was either depressing or encouraging. You can tell me which one it should be. But if right now there's 2,700 is Methodist students in divinity school, I've done 9 classes in the last year and a half to have more people than that in it on Homebrewed. And having taught divinities classes recently, those individuals are just as intellectually engaged and do the reading and ask questions as divinity students. And so I say that because I feel like there is an audience that the solution to their reflection on the faith and vocation and all that kind of stuff isn't necessarily residential seminary, and it isn't the full degree to jump through whatever you need to for your denomination's ordination. Because I recently, like in the last year, there's been 18,000 people take at least one of the classes, and these are not they're not easy things. I mean, so And there's like 3,000 and some that took 4 classes or more, which are that's that's pretty wild, right? Like, so I feel like that there a lot of times if we look at these metrics, we go, oh, Protestants don't care about wrestling with their faith or the big questions and blah 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 blah. Well, it could just be we are trying to hand off the tradition and the gift of critical, faithful reflection, and the pathway that did it best before, especially in Christendom, is intense investment in a few people that then become the authorities in normal structures like churches and all the denomination accoutrements and stuff. But if you are just thinking of if you start adding numbers to the people that are engaging in it in other ways, then it seems to me there's energy where people want the gift of community wrestling around big questions and such, and the way we're stuck trying to hand it off may not match the lives or patterns or spaces that people have who before would have gone to a residential seminary in normal ways.
Well, here's the problem with the main line, though. They want to do everything by this very rigid structure, where they make sure all their pastors are very trained up and educated. And you know what a lot of non-denominational evangelical churches say? Hey, you look like you can preach. Come on. And I get why the main line is the way it is. You don't want people up there who are amateur theologians slinging it. But if your options are no pastor or a pastor who has had some homebrewed Christianity training, I mean, wouldn't you take that option? I would. I mean, Tripp, I think you do a good job, buddy. I would want to have people who have some training with you as opposed to not having a pastor at all, because the data is clear on this. You're not training up a ton of pastors to go into United Methodist churches or Episcopalian churches across America to fill these pulpits, which desperately need filled. So maybe you should drop your requirements a bit and realize that the perception of education has changed a lot in America over the last 20 years, and think alternate routes might be good, or work on alternate routes to get people into these positions. And maybe you train and you work at the same time, towards getting more training and more working, right? So you intern and get education at the same time, because the alternative is even worse, which is these churches who have the money and have the people and have the building don't have the pastor. I don't think that's a good outcome. I'd rather kind of lower the standards a bit to fill those churches. I guess that's my Baptist background, where I'm like, just y'all come, I don't care. But to make like a sociological argument, Rodney Stark said in Churching of America, the reason the Methodists and the Baptists beat out the Congregationalists and the Episcopalians was because they were so entrepreneurial. They basically said, here's a Bible, there's a region, go over there and evangelize people and figure out how to do it good. And a lot of those people were really good at it, and they had no theological training at all, while the Congregationalists said, well, let's go to Princeton, let's establish Yale and all this stuff. And they didn't have that same fire in their gut, because for those Baptist pastors, it was raise up a congregation because they're going to pay your salary. So if you don't, you kill what you eat. So if you don't raise those churches up, you're not going to eat. And I think that kind of fire is what allowed those kind of traditions in America, Baptist and Methodist, to really grow, while the old school mainline traditions declined. It was because they said, well, we've got to do everything right first, and then we'll put you out in the field. I mean,
yeah,
that's my Baptist root show, and I know for sure I'm saying that.
Oh, yeah.
Presbyterians and Lutherans and Episcopalians are like, you are wrong, friend. But I just don't see a good future where, if you're focused on getting people through a 4-year MDiv degree, most people aren't going to be able to hack that. They're not going to want to do that. They're going to drop out. They're not going to want to start to begin with. And you're going to have empty churches, Lutheran, Episcopalian, Methodist across America, that could have pretty competent pastors, maybe not up to the 100% standard you want, but 80% is pretty darn good in this world. I mean, be innovative, try something else. And I just don't see that a lot of need for that, or a lot of desire for that amongst those denominations right now.
Yeah. Yeah. When I was a part of the local board for recognizing ordinations with DOC and UCC in LA, one of the things a couple of the leaders tried to do that then got pushback because everyone else had to do, go the normal way, was when very successful young evangelicals get fired because they're like down for inclusion or committed to justice or ecology care, or they like think science isn't stupid. Don't tell them that they have to go to 2 more years of school and take a polity class and all these things to slowly get put in some congregation with 40 people. Like I had multiple people where I would, write the letter and try encourage and support them. And then they're like, I was in charge of a college ministry with 300 people, and you want to put me in a 20-person disciples church that pays almost nothing? So there is I think there are even other ways of figuring out how you help people that share your convictions and are gifted, that are leaving those very evangelical spaces, find a home in Protestant spaces where they're celebrated for coming, and then you kind of add on and encourage while they're serving in places. The kind of theological education stuff. I mean, the main thing to me that mainline Protestant ordination stuff does really well is they do psych evals for ministers, and you do diversity inclusion training, you do boundary training, you have safe church policies, the kind of things that limit the intense traumas that publicly humiliate the church. The volume of demands made on you to be past basic psych eval and to know what boundaries between congregants and all that kind of stuff, and you don't get moved around in the same way, requires a lot of people to cover up for you if there's a problem, and think in ways that in evangelical and non-denominational spaces they don't have those demands. Those to me would be more important than making sure that they spent a year learning about the history of your particular denomination. But what they told me,
my denomination does that, by the way. Yeah, but my denomination does a 6-course training to get ordained, and a lot of it is boundaries, ministerial ethics, one class on Baptist polity, which I guess I can understand that. Like if you especially don't come from a Baptist background,
we have to learn how to do biblical baptisms.
I did that in a free Methodist school, and it was all a bunch of free Methodist kids and me, and I was like the expert in the room because no one else were like, "How do you actually dunk someone?" I'm like, "Come over here, I'll show you. Let's get in the Baptist," because we had to go to like the Baptist church in town to do it because the Methodists don't have that. I was like, "Let's go, get in here." I knew the whole words and the hand and the thing and the dip and all that, and I was like, "Look at me! I know." For once in my life, I feel like I know what I'm doing in this school, because every other time I felt left out because I was a Baptist. It was all a bunch of free Methodists and me, and I was like, I'm a weirdo here. But that one moment, boy, Tripp, I shined. I was like, I will show you how to do it. I probably knew how to do it better than the guy leading the class did, because he was a free Methodist too. I was like, come here, Dr. Hartley, I'm going to dip you too. Let's go. But
you're like, have you read at the beginning of the Synoptic Gospels where John baptizes Jesus? So we do it that way. That's how we do it. Like it happens in the Bible.
Yeah.
That's what
obedience commands my Lord and Master Jesus Christ. I baptize you, my sister, in faith. In the name of the Father, Son, and the Holy Spirit. Buried with Christ in baptism, raised to walk in the newness of life. That's what you do, right?
Look. I understand. At a ecumenical seminary, it's fun because depending on which prof you have, you can tell they're more comfortable with one. And so I had preaching with a very gifted Black Baptist preacher.
Yeah.
And then I did the rituals class with a very high church Episcopalian who was like, you're going to need to shorten this, Tripp. And I was like,
8 minutes, Tripp. That's all you get, buddy.
You're like, whoa, I haven't even like finished my like opening offhand story that I pull back in 20 minutes later at the crescendo.
Like, I'm sorry, sir, you're wrong. This sermon has to be 25 minutes. This is how we do it now.
Yeah. I was like, so you don't want a sermon, you want a reflection.
Thoughts. You want Sunday thoughts is what you want, friend. That ain't a sermon. I don't know what this 8-minute thing is, but it is not. No.
I can't break a sweat that fast.
I
ain't running with a kettlebell. I don't got no kettlebell out while I'm preaching.
See, but I grew up Southern Baptist, so like 30, 40 minutes was what I was accustomed to. And then I became a mainline Protestant, but Baptists still have a lot of like, we're not mainline in that. Like our sermons are still like 20, 25 minutes long. So I was still trying to figure out like what the right length was for a long time. And one of my congregations said, they go, we'll tell you, or we'll show you, is what they actually said. We'll show you when you're done. And I was like, okay, I learned quick that like 18, 20 minutes is about all you need, and you're out of there. And life's I actually think that's a perfect sermon. Not to go off on a tangent. 20 minutes is like the perfect sermon length. You can get some meat in there and some potatoes in there. You get a couple good points. No one gets bored. If you're good, no one gets bored in 20 minutes, and you're done. And the whole thing lasts an hour, and you can walk out the door and feel like you did something.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's I've obviously we both have the Baptist hermeneutics, but when I visited congregations where the sermons are shorter, I just think um, I feel like this would have worked fine if everyone in the congregation actually knew what was happening when the scripture was read.
Mm-hmm.
But since the biblical literacy is so bad, and you only have 8 minutes, how do you actually help them if they were to read that text again, read it more informed? Unless you're just assuming they all go to Sunday school and do it, which not a great assumption. Like, isn't like your primary task is to help them wrestle with the word better, so it gets proclaimed in their living. And otherwise, the 8 minutes is like it's like you cut out the exegesis and you're like, well, here's my theological take on this and a
Yeah.
cute story, or that kind of thing.
Well, I
But
mean, if you can't do a whole chapter, like you can't read 25 verses in an 8-minute sermon, because by the time you get done reading, you got 3 minutes left.
yeah, what's
I
up with that? What's
I
up?
I mean, listen. I'm a Baptist in that way through and through. Give me a 20-minute sermon. I don't want that 8-minute junk. Give me some meat. Come on, I want to hear some I want some exegesis. I want some cultural context. I want some Greek translation. Give me all that stuff.
I mean, good exegesis brings Jesus, and then I mean, why would it have his name in it if it didn't help his arrival? Have you thought about that?
So here's one funny story and I'll be done. When I was a youth pastor, I really got into liturgical stuff, right? So, like how in the Catholic Church, when you read the gospel, everyone rises when you read the gospel. Everyone stands in the congregation. Well, I taught my young people in youth group to do that. Like I thought, like, we'll teach them the value of the gospel to stand up. Well, then the old guy in my church was preaching that next Sunday. And the way he preached was he would read 3 verses from the gospel and then talk about them and then read 3 more verses. So every time he would read 3 verses, my kids would stand up in the front middle row of the congregation. Everyone else was sitting there looking at them like these guys are crazy. And then at one point, the pastor made me come up there during the sermon and tell the people why my students were standing up in the middle of the sermon. I was proud and embarrassed all
Funny.
at the same time.
Yeah, there's a number of things you can do as a youth minister that you think are pedagogically helpful that generate attention when it's shared with the congregation. You know,
Mm-hmm.
I told them if homebrew listeners have heard the long rant before, but that where the word Almighty shows up in liturgy, there's this long translation thing that sets up that it was really El Shaddai, which in Hebrew is well-breasted one or mountain refuge. And so, if you just mark out every time Almighty shows up in prayers, because omnipotence is a theological mistake, and just say the Holy Tetons, then it makes the prayers a lot more on point. And so confirmation kids would do it, and it would be funny, like to exegete the liturgy and be like, if you know the whole history of translation, how it got developed, like so often the ideas we think are normative are not normative to the text, right? And anyway, well, some kid sitting there, volunteers to do the scripture reading workshop with one of the retired poets in the congregation is going to read scripture, and she's like 16 or so, and just straight up changes it, the psalm, and it's like, Lord Almighty, but she says, Lord, well-breasted one, blah 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 blah, and I and thinks nothing of it. Youth not paying attention. Then what happens? What did you say? And she goes, oh, well, insert like, well, Jerome was translating into Latin from the Septuagint, and there were like 9 different translations of El Shaddai, and he picked Cosmocator, which was what was used in Job, and ultimately you erase that for the people of Israel, God is like a mother whose breasts don't run out, or a place you hide in the mountains, and is explaining this, and it doesn't communicate the kind of powerful feminine protection and love that the name of God, El Shaddai, has. And and we had talked about it as an example of translation. Well, she just put it in there. And the next thing I know, I have a number of meetings with congregants that week. And I
Thank you for that, right? Like, thank you
no,
for doing that and putting me on the spot. Great.
I was like, I said it. You can help in your head, and it's an exercise to learn how if we just assume this is final, we internalize ideas that may not ultimately be life giving. And I did not mean edit the psalm from the NRSV and read it in the church, but
Proud and embarrassed, right?
yeah, I was like, but it is accurate anyway.
That
All
is
right,
that's a super in the weeds story, by the way, Tripp. Like way down like the theological rabbit hole.
it is, but that's why it's at the end, Ryan.
That's also why I go, wow, I'm not a theologian. Holy crap.
Well, there's only a few proper names of God, and they're in Hebrew. Then there's the text in Greek, which was dominant in Second Temple period Judaism, as it like Greek became the predominant word. Then Vulgate, Latin translation, the official translation by Jerome of the for the Catholic Church. He didn't want multiple words translated for what is one proper name in Hebrew. So there's a whole list of translations in Greek for El Shaddai. And he goes, which one am I going to put in the Vulgate every time El Shaddai comes up? So everyone knows it's the same word. And then he picks the Greek word used for El Shaddai in Job, which was cosmokator, Almighty. And so then Almighty is in the Vulgate. It gets in all the prayers because all the original liturgies for the church are in Latin until the Protestant shows up. And then everyone just keeps using it because it's the most used referent to God in old liturgies. But it wasn't the actual name of God, El Shaddai, in Hebrew, which is well-breasted one or mountain refuge. So I always joked about it being the Holy Tetons as a way to get it both. If you're trying to get divine feminine protection energy as one of God's proper names in Scripture, and come on, 15 and 16-year-olds, if you tell them take your prayers, scratch out Almighty, and put Holy Tetons on it, they're going to remember that. Staying power.
So Jerome is the reason we say Almighty right now.
Yeah,
for prayers and stuff.
Yeah, and and asking a celibate guy like which one are you going to go with? They're not going to go with oh we should go back to the Holy Tetons. That's not the option he's going to go with. But Ryan, there are actually other theological problems if you let celibate men shape a significant portion of church history.
That's a very mainline Protestant thing for you to say.
No, I'm just Protestant.
That's right. You're not using the word mainline anymore. That's gone.
No.
You are a Protestant. They're Christians. You're a Protestant. It's way different.
Yeah, it's way different.
Yeah.
Like, since there's only a few of us so far that have embraced this, if you want to survey all of them, you just send me a link.
I'll send you a Survey Monkey link tomorrow. You'll have it.
You don't even have to give me an Amazon gift card.
You'll do it for free, huh?
I will gladly stand in on behalf of Protestant.
Man, you know what I'd love to do, Tripp? I'd love to do like a survey of just your listeners to see like how much they diverge from like the general population on these issues. Like,
I think it'd be a lot of fun.
Yeah, because like I can look at like Christians in the general population versus your follower to see like how much they diverge on what issues, and you might be interested to see like there might be issues where they don't diverge that much from like the gen pop of Christians in America. That'd be cool.
Yeah, the question is, would it lead to me then doing episodes on the things I know a majority of them disagree with me on, just to encourage? Like, it's like when you're a minister and then you find out you've been there 6 years and that like half the church disagrees with you violently on something, and you're like,
wait a minute,
you said you like my sermons.
You've been holding back this whole time. I didn't even know.
You were in my class. You went to confirmation with me, and you still. Yeah.
I like it. By the way, can I just say, like, you're such like this whole thing has shaped you so bad. Everything you're thinking about is content. Like, how can I turn that into content? You notice that?
You want to know else I noticed? That all these schools, I've applied for like 70 jobs in the last 4 years, and I didn't get any of them. So now I'm just under the burden of content, Ryan. I
gotta feed the beast, dude. Hey, I do the same thing. I gotta make graphs every day. I'd be like, where's Ryan at? Where's the graphs at?
Yeah, we're on the graphs. I want, though I'm not joking. I would totally go if you came up with survey ideas. I would totally go get people to do it, and I would talk a bunch of other podcasters to get their audience to do it. And people click which ones they listen to, and then see how it goes. That would be thoroughly fascinating to me.
Well, yeah, just like how your audience is different, like Dan Koch's audience, for instance. Like that would be really interesting to me.
Like I have like a higher number of graduate degrees in mine. Also not, smitten with like performative moderate takes on things. Yeah,
that's why you have me on, right? Because
you're my token conservative, Ryan.
I like how I'm conservative. Like in the general public, if I walk out my door right now, I'm probably in the top 10% most liberal people in my town.
Look,
and yet on this one, I'm
just speaking for the Protestants, Ryan.
Oh, that's yes.
You're a conservative Protestant. You're a conservative Protestant.
Yeah, exactly right. You know what? 55% of United Methodists are Republicans now, too, by the way.
Look, everyone has their growing edges. Like, that's why because they don't know what it means to be Protestant.
They don't. And I did a thing with the chaplains last week, and I was like, for you Christian, like you Protestant chaplains, will you use the word Protestant like in sermons, like every once in a while, just to like try to teach people the word Protestant again, because they don't know it and it's making my life suck. So help me help you, educate them a little bit, because right now they don't know anything. Like I want to do like a survey of like theological knowledge, just basic, like what do Christians know about stuff? Not like that, not that Ligonier stuff that's really like in the weeds, like basic stuff. Like how many commandments are there? Can you name 3 disciples? Like how many gospels are there? Like that kind of like that basic stuff. I would be
like canonized or non-canonized. See, that's the super nerd answer. It's like they're like, oh, well, 4, and then but if they're like canonized or non-canonized, they're like, oh, and they're like, well, I only trust 3 of them because John creeps me out.
Get the Sunday school answer, Tripp, not the freaking in the weeds MDiv answer. Get over yourself. Don't overthink the question. That's why I tell everyone on Twitter, stop overthinking this. Just answer the damn question.
Well, at Theology Beer Camp, the second night, me and Pete Enns, who does the Bible for Normal People podcast, did a sword drill, and it was pretty fun.
Did you win?
No, we hosted it. Everyone that was there got to compete.
Oh wow, that's fun, man! Like this is like evangelical nostalgia trip.
Oh yeah, and if you won, you got this really sweet trophy. Picture this: you're going to be blown. On the top of it, there's obviously a giant cross, and then coming off the cross are these little lines on top of one, prayer hands on the other, open Bible, cross into decorative shaft of trophy. What is on this decorative shaft? Well, on the homeschool website where I found out you could order sword drill trophies, one option was patriotic. It is an American flag.
Oh, I love this.
You got cross Bible prayer hands, patriotic shaft, and then the base. On the base, if you were on the winning team at the sword drill, it said, I slaughtered all foes with the sword of the Lord at Theology Beer Camp. And you get to go home with that beautiful piece. Like, you're like, you really crescendoed.
When's this next beer camp happening, Tripp?
Oh, I'm working on that. We'll see. You could be my conservative Protestant.
I feel like everyone's going to look at me and go, let's not talk to that guy.
No. We'll you got to harass someone. Plus, we already know that you have experience doing DC Talk karaoke.
I would, dude. Give me like freaking something from Super. By the way, my hot take: Supernatural is a better album than Jesus Freak is. It's just, you know what I mean? Like I really think it's a better album. I'll go to the death. I'll fight at night at the beer camp about why it's a better album. So there's my contribution.
Oh well, I mean, like content wise, I think it's better, but just the Jesus Freak, like, they opened up for Billy Graham, Ryan.
You're darn right. But here's the thing: I don't think that album aged very well, because like colored people doesn't really work today.
Well, but for the evangelical church, they might still need to sing it that version. They can't really get to a different kind of embrace of diversity until you get through that barrier. But I'm not going to have a discourse on multiple ways of critical race theory. That is not what we're going to end this out with. But Yeah, it's been a blast
Thanks, buddy.
as always. Though I'm worried that we like you're gonna have to next time come up with a take as hot as natalism.
People should have kids. People should have kids. That's my take.
No, I didn't ask you to say it again. Like I'm just saying. Like that time it was like a 3. You had like 3 pepper spice. Yeah, like it's like a little pepper spice, like maybe 1.5 spices. 1.5 spices.
I'll come with like 1 3/4 spicy take next time.
No, I want 2. I want 2. A solid 2.
2
A solid
spice.
2. And then we can survey we can survey podcast listeners and see which are my listeners or Dan's listeners theologically more orthodox. That'd be interesting. Because see,
I'm here for this. I don't know if I can turn it into a publication or anything, but I'll do it just
I'm
for
just
you guys.
I'm just talking about a slide to put on here while I harass him.
But 35% of you are heretics. That's what you need to say. Like 35% of you are heretics, and just start railing on them.
Yeah, that's what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
But all righty. Well, I'm glad Sonia found this fascinating. She must have great taste.
Son, you are chef's kiss. You know what's up.
All righty. Well, I'll talk to you later, Ryan.